I've got a lot to cover today, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Elicia McDonald. I'm a partner here at Airtree. I'm also relevant to this conversation, a parent to 2 young girls. I've got Annabelle, who's 4, and Madeline, who's 2. All 3 of us are actually in isolation right now with COVID, so this panel is coming at the right time for me. I definitely need all the tips. No pressure, guys. And I'm really excited for today's chat. We all know that mainstream media doesn't paint the best pictures of founders being engaged parents or great family role models. It seems like every other week recently there's a story about Elon's new offspring or WeWork employees spending 3 days downloading enough videos and movies to keep Adam Newman's 6 kids entertained while he's away on holidays. It's enough to turn people off the path of becoming a founder or resign themselves to being an average parent. So being a founder or a parent, we don't believe should be a binary decision. And founders who are parents shouldn't feel it's impossible to do both of those roles well. Although we understand it's not always easy. We'll have that conversation. We're having lots of good conversation before everyone joined and keen to continue that with everyone here. But people always say you can't be what you can't see. So I know that we have so many amazing founders in our portfolio who are also wonderful parents, and we're fortunate to be joined by 4 of them today. And we've been having these kind of conversations with our founders one-on-one for quite a while about this topic. And we feel that now it's important to have these conversations more publicly and to start changing the narrative and elevating these stories. So before I kick off, I just want to caveat that this is not going to be a discussion about how to become mum or dad of the year, but you will hear about founders and their parenting journey and how they try to make the juggle work. So quick housekeeping, we'll save some time for audience Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as we're going through, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring them, make sure we cover as many as we can in the time that we have left. And thank you also to everyone who submitted questions ahead of the session as well. So we're going to try and cover as much as we can in the session and the discussion that we have today. So with that, I'm thrilled to be joined by 4 of Airtree's founders here on the call today. So on my top right, we've got Kate, co-founder of Human. She also has 2 children, Peyton, who's 6, and Leo, who's 3. Simon, co-founder of Who Gives a Crap, who also has 2 children, Iggy, who's 6, and Sage, who's 2. Mark, co-founder of Qwilr, who has Henry, nearly 4, and Monty, 18 months. And finally, Siobhan, co-founder of Reejig, who has Tiana, 8, and Indy, 4. So on that note, I'd love to start this off with showing that this is a safe space. As I mentioned, no one here is winning parenting of the year awards. So let's start with a bit of a parenting fail, because we've all been there, and I'll kick off to share my example. I feel like this whole week is a bit of a parenting fail with 2 kids and myself with COVID. But the one that comes top of mind for me was actually a few weeks ago. My youngest, she just turned 2, was crying out in the middle of the night, "Mummy, where are you? Mummy, where are you?" I thought it was the morning, which is what she normally does. And I rolled over and checked my phone. It was 3:30 a.m. So I was like, that's really weird. That's out of character. I'll leave her to resettle. I think I fell back asleep. It's bad to admit. I don't know how long it was, but when I came back to and realized she was still calling out, I went into her room and I stepped directly into vomit. And it was all over her, all through her hair, down the wall, on the floor. And she's holding out a water bottle going, "Mummy, can you please fill up my water bottle?" And I just felt awful that I'd let her cry to resettle, covered in vomit, the poor thing, dehydrated clearly. So I cleaned all that up, got the Pina Clean out, washed all the sheets, brought her into our bed. By the time I got back into bed 30, 45 minutes later, as soon as I laid down, she vomited in our bed. So then all our sheets got stripped. My husband and I both ended up on the couch with her at 3:30 in the morning, trying to get as much sleep as we could before the next day at work. So that was my parenting fail, leaving my poor 2-year-old covered in vomit for who knows how long. But we've all been there. Hopefully it's not just me. But maybe on that note, Siobhan, I'll hand over to you to share one of your parenting fails. No pressure.
Where do I start? So probably at the start of Reejig's journey, when it started to get really busy, Indy was 2, and she was rolling around the house with her little pram, pretending to be a mum, and she was rolling the pram. And the next thing you know, she started running out to the front door. She got out the front door, out the gate, and I was screaming at her to get back into the house. I was like, "Indy, get into the house. What are you doing?" And she was like, "Mom." And I was like, "Indy, get in." And she was like, "Mom, I'm getting the dinner." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "What do you mean you're getting the dinner?" And she goes, "The man with the motorbike is here with our dinner. So I'm actually getting our dinner." We had so much Uber Eats that my kid thinks that mom's dinners arrive from Uber Eats instead of actually cooking. So yeah, that's what my kids are going into school telling all their friends.
Oh God. I can relate to that. I feel seen right now, Siobhan. So that or my daughter scream out, "Mommy, can't we just get milk run?" And I'm like, oh gosh, this is bad. Cool. How about Simon? Do you want to jump in next with a parenting fail?
Yeah, we travel a lot for work, and we do it as a family instead of me traveling individually. So we go for a larger stint in the middle of the year to the US, and we've done this ever since Iggy was 6 months old, and I think we were counting down until he got to the age where we were able to give him, the medicine that makes babies fall asleep on planes.
Nergan, I've heard about this.
We finally got to, whatever age it was, and we're like, oh my God, we can have an easy flight for the first time in however many years we've been doing this. And we got onto the plane and gave him the dose of whatever it was he was able to take. And it turns out that in 10% of kids, it makes them hyperactive. And he was in that 10%. And so, when he was supposed to be falling asleep, I think it was like 10 p.m., he was actually just completely hyped up for the next 4 or 5 hours, kicking, screaming, kept the whole plane awake while we were, walking him around, just trying to calm him down before he was eventually exhausted and passed out at sort of 2, 3 a.m. And then we landed, a few hours later. So that was a memorable one. But pretty much anything that can go wrong on a plane that's happened to us, gastro, leaking through nappies, like everything's happened. So yeah, it's a good time flying with kids.
Sounds like a whole heap of fun. Thanks, Simon. Kate, might jump to you next.
I think there's a theme here about vomit in planes.
Oh,
so we flew, I'm South African, when you fly anywhere, you have to go Cape Town, Joburg, and then Joburg, wherever you're going. And we were going to Greece. And on the way to Joburg, which is like a 2-hour flight, Peyton, my eldest, she was little at the time, like 2, had vomited in the plane. And so when we got off in Joburg, I went to the pharmacy to try find like something to like clean us up. We were like newish parents. Like I didn't travel with like 5 sets of like extra clothing. Like I learned that lesson. And I bought, I don't know if you guys get this in Australia, but it's called like Johnson & Johnson baby cologne. And it like smells nice. It's just like a clear liquid that you can like put on your baby that smells nice. And I bought that because that's like all they had. And I was like, okay, I'll use like wipes and then I'll like put this on so it doesn't stink of vomit when we get to like Greece. And while I was cleaning the pram, she got hold of the bottle and drank the whole thing. Oh, and it's basically pure alcohol. And so I was like phoning paramedics and like the doctor in hysterics. And the doctor basically just like laughed at me and was like, it's like, she's probably just going to like sleep really well. She's basically just like drunk. That was a good experience. So that was probably that's probably my worst one. That's probably like my worst one. Right? She passed out like on the plane. Like I kept like, and I was panicking the whole flight because I was like, he'd said it was fine. He was like, it's like got a low level of alcohol. She's probably just going to sleep. Like she'll be okay. But I kept like checking her pulse like the whole flight. Like I was convinced I was going to like kill my kid.
Oh,
huh?
Did she smell good?
Not great. She kept burping. She kept like burping up this cologne smell.
Baby aftershave.
It was, and I had to like explain to the air hostesses as well because I got on the plane and I was panicked, like something's going to go wrong. So I was like, look, this happened, and they were like, should you be flying? Like I just made the whole thing worse. It was a disaster. Man.
It reminds me seeing a kid drink bubble mix and then burping out bubbles. But
oh yeah, good.
Beautiful cologne.
Love it. I always used to think like when you hear stories about kids drinking like the cleaning liquid, I was like, what idiot parents? Like, what were they doing? she was in the pram. Like, I don't even, as to this day, I don't know how she reached it on the table. I don't know how she opened the cap, got the seal off. Like, I don't know how she did it. But anyway, I learned my lesson very, very quickly.
Oh my gosh. Thanks, Kate. Mark, do you want to go lucky last?
Sure. Mine is not quite so dramatic. So this is just a recent one for us, but we did our first like family sort of holiday overseas, went to New Zealand, had a bit of skiing and whatever else, which I think as Elicia may know, there were some disasters on that trip. But coming back, our little one, Monty, who's 18 months, just started waking up at like 4:30, 5 a.m. being like, let's go. This is New Zealand wake up time. Like, let's go. And so he has this nursery rhyme playlist that I'm sure everyone here is well familiar with. We said if we played that in his room, he would sort of stay nice and calm. Except that Henry, our 4-year-old, also likes this nursery rhyme playlist and has like realized that Monty is like listening to this in the morning. So now Henry, whenever he wakes up early, runs into Monty's room expecting there to be a music show going on. And so now we have not one, but 2 children running in. And so Henry wakes Monty up and, oh, mate, it's a disaster. So anyway,
We're getting early starts these days, by the sound of it. Fun with 2 kids. Well, thank you all for sharing that, and hopefully sets a good context for the rest of the conversation. But keen to jump into some of the questions that were submitted by the audience and some of the things that we're keen to dive in deeper with each of you. Maybe to start off with, as good context for everyone, I think it would be great to hear sort of a brief history of where your kids fit into your startup timeline. Did you have kids before you became a founder? Did you have kids during your founding journey? And also touch on how you briefly manage your role as a parent and founder with your partner. So Kate, I might hand to you first on this one, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So we started Human last year. So my kids were the same age they are now, 6 and 3 basically. And the way that we manage it, like, I mean, I think it's been like a journey becoming a parent. Like before I had Peyton, I had made up my mind that I was going to be like a working mom. I had the like all pay lined up. I took promotion on maternity leave. Like I was a career mom. And then everyone can guess where that ended. Like 3 months into having a baby, it was a complete disaster. And like the biggest thing I've learned about managing like your relationship with your partner and how you parent is that it can change, and that's okay. Like I think people feel like they have to pick a side. Like you've got to be a working mom, or you've got to be a stay-at-home mom, or you've got to be like a hybrid mom. And like you have to like choose, and then that's like your path forever. And I think like in our family, we've had to change that over time. So like when Peyton was little, I worked less. And then when my son was little, my husband worked less, and now we both work. And like, I think kids' needs change as they get older, and you don't know what your kids are going to need. Like my kids had quite significant health issues. And so we've had to like factor that in as well. And so I think like the way we've managed it is like with a lot of compassion and empathy, and like us not feeling scared to say when it needs to change, and not feeling like we have to pick a way that it's going to be and then sticking to that for like 18 years. Like, I think that's crazy. And I think you want to like figure out ways to make sure that as adults, you're both getting your needs met as well as your children, and that you can flex over time. That's kind of how we've done it.
I love that. I think when you're trying to find balance, realizing that might shift over time, and what you need, what your kids need, what your partner needs is going to evolve and change, and be open to that. So thanks for sharing, Kate. Mark, do you want to jump in with a little bit of your story around where your kids fit in with the Qwilr journey and how you work with your partner?
Yeah. So I started Qwilr about like nearly 8 years ago now. So Henry came along 4 years ago. So it was very much, we'd already been doing it for a while, had a thing sort of set up. And Qwilr was sort of like, it wasn't like we hadn't done the A with you guys yet. So we'd sort of done seed funding and whatever else. And so we were like, we were going along, but we hadn't quite got there yet. So definitely didn't have it all sorted out. I think and then sort of Monty came along a little bit later. I think, and that's sort of, I suppose going into it as a founder, like things change after you have kids. Like you definitely, like, there's less capacity to just pull like long weeks to solve the problem is no longer like the default. I'll just work an extra 10 hours on this or whatever else. Like you need to actually level up and become better at something about that sort of stuff there. I'm happy to talk more about that later. But and then partner wise, so I think this is like, I have a very supportive partner. Like I couldn't have done it without her. She is, I think, very lucky. Like she's a GP working in GP land 3 days a week, plus she does sort of every other Saturday morning at her practice is like a very normal thing. So we've sort of been able to sort of get quite a lot of balance on that side. And like, I know that I am like, I don't know, I sort of feel like I'm accruing some degree of like parental debt over time that I will have to repay at some sort of stage. But I think like it's been, I think obviously very lucky on that side. But it's also one, I think to Kate's point, it's a constant conversation and it changes. Like it's not, there have been times where I've been like, I have to, travel or do stuff like that or whatever else. And there are other times where I sort of make it clear work side that like I have to like, you have to do certain things and I have to like prioritize family life over that, etc.
Thanks, Mark. Siobhan, might jump to you next on this.
So probably an extra layer of complexity in my world is that my co-founder, one of my co-founders is also my husband. So that makes things a little bit more interesting in terms of negotiating. And my view is that I get customers, so I got priority. So whoever's talking to a customer gets to be on the Zoom, whereas the other person has to look after the kid. But when Reejig started, I had my first daughter, Tierna. And then when I was on parental leave, Indy would have been like 3 months old. And during that whole period, like the Reejig, like the workforce intelligence thing just kept like coming up and down. And then it would have been like 3 or 4 months in that I was like, I got to do this. If I don't do it, someone else will. And the pull of that became a bit too intense. So it probably started then. I think the most trickiest part is not being the baby stage, because they can kind of sleep and it's fine. But it's the actual period before they go into preschool, you know, where they actually need to be entertained, and you like that just part in between. I think as we've grown so quickly, like it's been really challenging. And I don't know if anyone else has had this problem. See, getting a freaking nanny in this country right now, like it is a nightmare. Like we can't get a nanny. We've had like all of our nannies go back to like Germany or whatever. So like having no family infrastructure for us. Obviously I'm not Australian, so it makes it like a little bit tricky. So kind of all started probably when Indy. So Indy's probably reflective of Reejig as a company. You know, like it's that she's starting to grow up and actually can kind of, you can look at the baby and then look at the business and kind of go, actually, you can see it like where they're both at in terms of the journey, which is quite cute as well.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing, Siobhan. And then Simon.
Who Gives a Crap sold first product in 2013, and we bootstrapped until very recently. So Iggy was born 2016, so about 3 years into that journey. I think in terms of how my partner and I work, we were both self-employed when we had kids. And I think sort of interestingly, my wife's career kind of had a bit of a natural break in it, and my career was kind of taking off. And so we had plans of, you know, co-parenting and really kind of sharing responsibilities fairly equally. And then I think that first 12 months we sort of had, as Kate talked about, a bit of a change where we realized that actually that didn't make sense, and we had to sort of end up with more kind of gender stereotyped parenting roles than I think we were both hoping for or excited about. And you know, now I think we've sort of come to terms with that. But you know, it's interesting. It's not something we're particularly proud of, and it's not something we want to be forever, because we think it's also not great in terms of role modeling for our kids and what we'd like to see from, you know, for them thinking about what they'd like to see from their parents. So it's made sense in this kind of part of their childhood while they've been young, but is something that we'll switch up again and make a change to in the future.
Yeah, I feel like that's a common theme from all of you, is that this evolves and this changes. And I think that's everything to do with parenting. You might have the best laid plans, and then you need to be nimble and adapt. So I think the same thing can be said about how you balance parenting between you and what makes sense for your family at that particular point in time. But thank you.
The pressure of one salary as well, like just adding to that, like having one person at home and one person at work, that actually is another layer of complexity, and suddenly you become the main income earner, and that's freaking pressure, because especially if you're building a company, it all goes to shit, right? Like, so I'm just like adding that part in, like, because like I think that's having two people working, like that's a little bit less pressure, because at least there's some cash coming through. Yeah,
for sure. I think we also got our first mortgage just as Iggy was born as well. So there's a lot of extra pressure at that point in time. I should say my wife does work, so she freelances and has board responsibilities. So we do have to juggle that a bit, but you know, she's not working full time. So we do have some slack there, which really helps from a family perspective. And we live in the country, so childcare is a bit harder than what it is in the city as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing your stories. And as I mentioned, we had lots of questions submitted beforehand. So one of them that I wanted to cover off on was extreme context switching. So we all know when you've got your intense commitments as founders, but then you've also got commitments as family, whether it's swimming lessons, ballet lessons, parent-teacher interviews, you name it. So I'd love to hear some examples of how you go about and keeping on top of your commitments when you have to go through that extreme context switching. And I might jump to you first on this one, Siobhan, to share your example of some extreme context switching as a founder and parent.
I mean, this is the one we were giggling about not so long ago.
Didn't you post something on LinkedIn about this too?
Yeah, because I was like, do you know what? Like, we don't talk about this stuff enough. Like, I feel like we should just be open about it. Anyway, long story short, we're in the middle of our, like, it isn't Series A, it's the one after, but not a B. It's like we've topped up. And basically we're in the middle of this not planned race. So like data room, nothing's ready. The pit business is a fucking mess. Everything's just like, don't let anyone look in. And we start going through this process, and I get home after this really intense discussion about our models and our forecasting, and I get this phone call from daycare to say that the whole school has nits, that everybody's got nits, that like, and I was like, what is nits? Like, I was like, I didn't even know that these were a thing. You don't get them in Ireland. Well, I've never heard of them. So apparently the whole school had got head lice. We had got head lice. Mike had got head lice. We had to strip everything in the whole house. And then we had this paranoia, do we tell the investors? We were like, do we tell them or do we not tell them? Like, what is the outcome if we tell them? So having this meeting and having this conversation and then telling them that actually, by the way, just so you know, this could be a scenario. So I think going from having really serious conversations in justifying your forecast and why you need so much money to, oh, and by the way, when you go home, if you can just get your wife to check your hair. So yeah, like stuff like that. Like, I think it's just like snaps you right back out of like your unimportant, false made up problems that we're all creating for ourselves. And you know what I mean? To actually like, this little person has now got lice and I gotta clean my whole house. Yeah. So yeah, that kind of stuff is probably on a regular cadence in our house. Just regular, going from like pitching some of the top investors to the world to stripping beds and checking hair. Yeah.
And in the midst of all the chaos, you took the time to send me a WhatsApp voice message laughing all the way through about what you were dealing with. So I appreciate that, Siobhan, sharing that.
Well, I mean, I was like, no, like, does anyone else have this problem? Like, I was
I'd actually dealt with nits 2 weeks earlier, so it was actually quite timely. We were laughing
did
about
you
it.
give them? Were you like the case zero?
Yeah, or maybe, or no, I hope I didn't give it to, oh my gosh, let's not go there. Thank you, Siobhan. Simon, what about you? Extreme context switching.
Yeah, I mean, I like context switching because I think it's fascinating how you have to like reframe your mindset before going into a new situation. I think one of the things that I'm really conscious of with it is that, you know, you're trying to often bring your best self into every meeting as a founder and a CEO, or, you know, whatever role you're playing in the company. And I think that's often where our focus is. And we forget that after that's all done, we go and see our family and we might collapse on the couch and have a drink and look at our phone and not want to talk to anyone. And so I think the context switching in a family environment, you have to remember that your family needs to get the best version of you as well as everyone else that you're dealing with all day. And that's the part of it that I think is the most challenging. So it's not just being present, it's about, you know, actually being, you know, a very good version of yourself, if not the best version of yourself for your family as well as your team.
And we're actually talking about this before everyone joined as well, but like that context switching can be a helpful thing, right? Because it can pull you out of whatever chaos you're dealing with there, and you're just in this moment, hopefully, you know, full of joy with your kids, where you're playing with them on a trampoline or whatever it might be. So simple, but I guess to Siobhan's point, it pulls you out of whatever chaos you think you're dealing with and into what, you know, really matters in that moment, which is being present, to your point, Simon, and being engaged and giving them your best self. So thank you for sharing. I think on that note, it might be helpful to talk a little bit about boundaries. And this is a question that always comes up, and we know that they can be blurry. And as we mentioned, none of us are perfect. We've all shared our fails, but I'd love to hear some more tactical examples. I know people submitted these questions beforehand around the boundaries between work and life and family life and how to make that work. So Kate, I might hand to you first on this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I love this question actually, because I feel like people often ask this question, like they often ask me this question, like, what are my boundaries? And I always find that a really interesting question, because I think boundaries are like actually a very personal thing that each person has to like figure out for themselves. And so like, maybe I'm going to, if anyone minds, I'll quickly speak to like how my boundaries got there. I can tell you what a few of them are, but I feel like how they got there is actually more useful to people potentially on the call who are trying to set them for themselves. And I think the first thing about boundaries is like, you have to actually believe you're better with them. Like a lot of people are like, think boundaries are like a nice to have, like I'm going to add them in, but if shit goes, like I saw a quote someone put in the chat, like everything goes to shit when you get punched in the face, like the plan goes out the window. And it's kind of like that. It's like, if your boundaries are a thing you're adding on top, because you're like, they're a nice to have, like, but if something urgent happens, they're going to go out the window. Like, you're kind of wasting your time. And I think like the first thing about boundaries is to like actually believe I am better at my job and being a mom and being a partner and being a friend if I have them. If you don't believe that, you can have a fucking list of 10 boundaries, and the minute something happens, you're going to drop them because you don't actually believe in your gut that they matter. And so I think that like that for me was like a really long journey, and that didn't just happen when I became a founder. It was something that like happened over a number of years. And then the best advice I ever got about boundaries was my boss was telling me this story that they do with kids when they're teaching kids about volume and like spatial awareness. So they give kids like a vase, and then they give them like sand and stones, like little stones, and then like big rocks. And they try and say to the kids, how do you fit as much of this as possible into the vase? So they put the sand in and it's full, and then they like take it out, and they put the pebbles in and it's full, and they take it out and they put the rocks in and it's full, and they're like, impossible. And then what they teach them is you put the like rocks in first, and then you throw the pebbles and they go in between the rocks, and then you put the sand in. And like basically the advice I was given was like, the only way boundaries actually happen is if they're planned for and they're like in your diary. And so like what I did, she basically said, go to like destroy your diary and put in your diary the big rocks. Like, are the big rocks cooking dinner for your family? Or is it like picking up your kids? Or is it like being there for swimming? Or is it like going for a walk every day? Like, what are your big rocks? Put them in your diary. Then put in the pebbles. Like, what are the meetings you need to go to and the things that need to happen or the business is going to fall apart? And then like any sand that fits in, cool. And like even color code your diary. Like blue is rocks, like green is pebbles, and like sand is like red or whatever. And like then it's very easy to see like, well, I don't move my rocks. Like, and then your team can also see like what you're not willing to move, right? Like my team can see in my diary, like if I'm picking up the kids, if I'm at OT with my daughter, if I'm like not available that morning. And that's really helpful. And then also I think like there, as a founder, you need to sometimes do things like, we have a lot of people in the US we need to speak to in the mornings or the evenings. And so like what I did was I picked like one evening and one morning slot that's consistent every week that I offer meetings. So my family knows Tuesday nights I'm not there, and Thursday early mornings I'm not there. But like on a Monday, I leave at 3 to take my kid to OT and like do the groceries so my family can run. And so I think like what my boundaries are sort of irrelevant. Like I think people need to like figure out what are their 3 categories and then like figure out how you fit those in. And my suggestion is like, if your boundaries aren't in your diary, they're not boundaries. Like they're not actually going to happen. And so like that would be, I hope that answers the question, but that's kind of how we do it in our home.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing, Kate. And I think it's right to call out that everyone's boundaries are going to be different. It's about just knowing what sticks true to you and then how you implement that day to day to actually hold yourself accountable to that. So thank you for sharing. Mark, I'd love to hear your perspective on this too. What boundaries do you set, and how do you make work life and family life work together?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo a whole bunch of things that Kate said. I mean, I think the thing for me that maybe was a little different in the journey, and I sort of said this a tiny bit earlier, but like, you know, in the pre-kid land, I was sort of, you know, I would just be like, well, we have this chunk of work needs to be done, and so I will just stay late and do it. And I would just routinely, not every day, but like especially sort of towards the first half of the week, or like, you know, or sometimes over the weekend, would just like do more work. And so I would just, you know, like build up, you know, towards 60 or maybe even 70 or maybe even 80-hour weeks type thing. And like when you have kids, there's just like there are some wonderful realities of like you fundamentally like just like can't do that and be like a reasonable partner. And so you have to start setting some pretty firm boundaries. And I did the exercise that Kate described, and I would strongly encourage, whether or not you have kids or whatever stage of life you're at, every like year or so, blow up your calendar. It's a wonderfully cathartic experience, and like rebuild it and be thoughtful and like intentional about it. And I think that, you know, from my side, like, I think I'm sort of similar to Kate. I have times where we've got a lot of people in the US, so my mornings are pretty tight, but not my Monday mornings, because US is still Sunday. So then I can have some more flexibility around that time. And so for me, like one of the important things is like, and this I think sort of fits in, is like I go to the gym on Monday mornings. I go with my brother and my dad. I get some like family time in, but it's like, that's like a time that's like kind of quite sacred. I have some like other things again on like other times of the week where people know, but also people know that like from multiple days a week at 4:45, I'm off. I'm picking up the kids from daycare, or 4:30, whatever it is. And I like, that's like, I kind of can't be touched. And then similarly to Kate, I have Tuesday nights from sort of 7:30 to about 9-ish. Like anyone in our European team can book in time with me. And so like it's sort of open, it's available. I have some occasional standing ones there and whatever else, but my family knows that after, bath time and bedtime has occurred, that I'm going to be, my wife knows that I'm going to be sort of off for the rest of the night for another hour and a half or so. But again, it's like, I don't know, I think you sort of can find rhythms that tend to work quite well for you. The other thing that, honestly, I've got to say, like, I was so much of that like 70-hour work week shit was like crap quality work, like pretty menial, low value, non-creative, not high leverage work. And I think that, like, I'm not going to say that there's no place for that. I do think there is a place for that type of work sometimes in life. And like I don't want to say never do that, because I think that's also bullshit. But like, I definitely think you can do a lot less of it. And I think there's actually learning to be a good delegator, learning how to prioritize, learning how to say no to, like, all that stuff and the constraints that family life puts around you, like, kind of forced me to actually engage with that deeply and made me, I think, better at my job. Now, if you can do this before having kids, bravo to you. But I think it certainly was one that was just very clarifying, because it's just like, well, I can't trade off against this. So I just have to make it work. And it made me, I think, far more effective.
I think that's a great point. I think when you have children, you're forced into that ruthless prioritization, but it is something that you can do before you have children. I think I can imagine people, thinking about founding a business and maybe becoming a parent at some point as well, and thinking, oh my gosh, I have an 70-hour work week or whatever it is. How would I make it work? But you do, and you realize that maybe a lot of those things in your diary are the sand that you talk of, Kate. And how do you try to build that ruthless prioritization in as early as possible?
Yeah.
So there is the space there. It's hard. You got to really think about how you balance it, but it feels like it is.
But that narrative of like, the harder you work, the more hours you put in, the more successful your company is going to be. Like, I just don't buy it. I really don't buy it. Like, and I think that's where like people really have to spend time thinking about that. Like, is that true? Is that really true? And actually, like, it's not good for you, and it's also not good for your team, and it's not setting a good example. Like, so often companies, we say things like, everybody should have boundaries and work-life balance, but then the founders like messaging people at 11 o'clock at night, and it's like, well, you're setting the example, right? Like, things don't happen in policy, they happen in practice. And so like, I really think spending time like dissecting that narrative before you have kids, like, is really powerful, because it's just not, I just don't think it's true.
Love that. And I think the other point that you mentioned, Mark, is that you carve out time to go to the gym with your brother and your father. And I think that's also really important. I think sometimes in these conversations, you think it's like either work or it's like kids and being a parent, but also to be a good parent and to be a good founder and a good leader of a business. Like, you need to have me time and some time for you as well. So making sure that that's some of your rocks or your stones that you carve out for yourself as well, and holding yourself accountable to that as best you can. It's not always easy, but it does make you a better parent, a more engaged partner, and hopefully a better founder as well. So thank you for sharing your experiences. I've got screaming kids in the background now, so if you can hear any background noise, that's my daughter fighting her middle of the day nap. On that note, how about we jump into a little bit about cultivating a supportive work environment? We're obviously, all four of you are in a situation where you're leading businesses, growing teams. And so not only do you have your own individual circumstance, but as Kate mentioned, the sort of example that you said also influences the broader team, and you're in a situation where you can set policies and practices which influence your company and also the broader sort of startup ecosystem and the tech ecosystem. So I would love to hear some of the ways that you're cultivating a supportive work environment for parents at your companies. And Simon, I might hand to you first on this one.
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing I'd probably say here is that this exercise of managing your calendar, we have everyone in the company do that, regardless of whether they're parents or not parents. And we've always done that. We've been a remote first business for a long time. Most companies are remote now, but we find a lot of people who haven't worked in remote environments, particularly global remote environments, can start and lose control of their calendar. And, we say to them, you need to put in your calendar, what are the things that are important to you, whether that's kids or exercise, or for me, surfing, or, whatever that is. You need to get those in your calendar and set your non-negotiables, whether that's mornings or evenings on certain days, or whatever those non-negotiables need to be. So that's an exercise that we do right across the whole company, because we understand, how important that is for everyone, not just for founders. And the other big thing, this is really obvious, but parental leave policies are just massive. I was the first person in our company to use our parental leave policy, and I wanted to role model, that it should be used a certain way. And so I took the maximum 3 weeks of leave that we had in there, and literally almost died when I came back to work. And I needed a lot longer because we had quite a complex, first kid. And so I learned from that mistake, and now we have 2 months for secondary care and 3 months for primary carer, plus a return to work extra month that kicks in as people come back, so they can come back 3 or 4 days a week for an extra 20 days of the year. So that's been a huge kind of part of being supportive for us. And what we've found is that especially the return to work policy has been really positive for us as a business in terms of getting people back into the workforce and feeling like they're contributing. And one of the big things that we did there was also add in what we call a keep in touch day. So when people are on parental leave, I know for me personally, I don't want to be out of the business for 2 months without knowing anything that's going on. There's certain meetings that I want to be there for, just to keep in touch with what's going on or to understand how a project's moving forward. And that helped me be less anxious about taking a long period off away from work. And so we put in place keep in touch days that allow people to say, these are the pieces of work that I want to be there for, or, I'll cram a bunch of stuff into this one day every month so that they can take a longer period of leave and still feel connected to the things that are important for them at work, which I think is actually really important for mental health of a lot of new parents as well. So they're the big things that we've done.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Simon. I think that ties in really nicely with what Kate said before around like policies and practice. And I think you setting the example as the first employee to take that and then to learn from your experience and improve the policy, I think is great. So so thank you for sharing. Siobhan, I might jump to you as well. Like, what does Reejig do around cultivating a supportive work environment for parents?
I mean, I'm not saying that this is the standard, but like our experience was that it was 70-hour weeks. So the part, Mark, where you said, like, our reality was we hired 90 people in 12 weeks. We won all these customers that we were like, shit, how do we deliver? And our early team was like, everyone was like, we are building a new category now. So like, let's go as fast and as hard as we can. And there was probably a moment where we as a team were like, this is ours, like, let's go. And I think, I'm not saying this is the example to set, I'm just being realistic that our reality was that we had this moment and we all felt that if we were gonna waste it, right? Like, so I'm not a good example of doing anything balanced, if I'm really honest. I think where we got to more, and we went out for dinner and we were talking about all this a couple of weeks ago, like my style of working, Mike's, the whole early team, it's pretty intense. But we set milestones that when we get to this, now we're going to do this. And that unlocks this, and it starts to create like an expectation level where it's not going to be like this forever. And I'm probably the worst at it. So I had to like literally take myself away for like a full 4 days to just have a reset moment, that each part of my business will be a different phase. And the type of version of me showing up is probably different at each version. And we wouldn't have got here today if I was being really kind of, spending a lot of time doing other stuff. Like at that point in time, we needed me to be on UK at night, US in the morning, Australia during the day. And that was across the board. So I'm more just saying that this was our reality, right? Like I would love to get to a place where I have really firm boundaries in my calendar and that these things are happening. I've just hired in a layer of VPs that I can see the light, right? I can now see the light at the end of the tunnel where they're now the delegation of up to escalation to me, to Mike, to Shuja becomes less and less. And so we're trying to figure that out, to be honest, right now. We are looking, we're restructuring our whole people, like the whole thing has to be revisited. Like we were 12 people, now 100, right? The complete difference in company, in scale, in expectation, in the publicness of this, everything is very different. So it's kind of like, everything that got us to this point is not going to get us to the next point. So we've had that reset button. Me and Mike took ourselves with the kids away for 5 days up to, where were we, like Port Stevens or something, just on the beach, no phones, no laptops. And we were like, let's design this next phase. So we're now in this next phase where we go to F45 together before work, which is kind of cool. And we're doing these things, but I'm just, I'm not going to tell anyone how to, like, Reejig hasn't figured that stuff out. Like, we're right in that point now of trying to figure out what can we do. We're also Series A in a market that is, you know, a bit weird and stuff. So we're also trying to not be reckless around just throwing benefits to everyone for everything, because we're trying to like think about it more. What is the most important thing that our people need today is kind of the thing that we're asking. And it seems to be time. It seems to be time to do stuff rather than paying for stuff. So we're now like thinking about that and how we bake that into, and it was exactly what you said, Simon, around like what's important to our people, rather than just me thinking that like parental leave or these things could be the important thing. Like, let's ask. So we started doing that. But yeah, probably not the right answer, because I don't have the answer. I just have like,
I don't think there is any right answer, Siobhan, on these things. And I think this is really interesting, because we're talking about businesses and parents that are all different stages, right? So you're in this early stage with Reejig, hyper growth, as you mentioned, go from 12 to 90 employees. Like, that is bonkers. And actually, one of the questions that came through on the chat from Mike, and then somebody said +1, was how founders manage stages where schedules were less flexible. For example, going through accelerators and early pilots. And I think,
and we're probably one of them. Like, we're probably in that scenario, right? Like,
being realistic about the fact that startups are not always going to be smooth sailing, and there are going to be periods, potentially months, years, where it's really, really intense, and just being honest about that. And it's not always going to be as easy to find that flexibility that you need, but knowing that, to your point, Siobhan, you get to a point where it's a new stage and a fresh start, and goes back to your point, Kate, around just needing to change over time and iterate. So I think that, like, Siobhan, there's no wrong answer here. Like, that's your reality, and it's good to be honest about it.
and I think, look at the people that start companies. We're all like so fucking obsessive, right? You're like, everyone is like doing this because they're so obsessed with like the idea and the concept, and that, you know, like, I'm sure everyone's like, this is my moment. Like, you know, we're all in our house going, this is our moment, kids. Like, you know, my kids are very involved in this conversation, right? Like, we've told them this is our moment, right? Like, they walk around in little Reejig hoodies and they go to school, and like, they're part of the build of this thing. So we're trying as much as possible that, like, I'm working like this, but it's not forever. And it's kind of probably like, you kind of, you know, when you're looking at the business as you go through each stage, when you're doing your fundraising, it's like also taking a moment to like go, the things that got me here are actually going to kill me. Like the 70-hour weeks, eating Uber Eats every night, not training, like, that's going to break me. I won't get to B. I will not make it to Series B. So it's like the same in our processes and the way we built the company, like how we went to market first. Like, that was super that wasn't scalable from founder led. So how do we transition? We're kind of trying to just bake that into our now model of how we look at things. And that's probably relevant for whether you've got kids or not, right? It's kind of like just how your health, because if everyone is a startup founder and is super obsessed, things are gonna slide. You're gonna not go to the gym. You're not gonna, you know, take time up your people. Like, yeah.
I think just a +1, I think there are just moments where you just have to fucking go.
Yeah.
And there's also moments where like it has to be you or your co-founder or whatever else. And like, guess what? That's what you fucking signed up for.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes it's really fucking hard. But like, I suppose the only thing I would sort of say is like, and it's just, again, like, different people have different pain thresholds and tolerances of how they sort of work and how they work best and whatever else. But like, figure out for whatever is your sort of truth of like, just suppose like the only thing I'd sort of say with like a degree of like, I don't know, I even hesitate to use the word warning, but just like that sort of zone of like, just be self-aware of like, because I know when I'm like, I can do this for like X period of time, being, you know, weeks or months or like, or whatever, or days, if it's very, very hard, but just sort of know that like, you know, just know your capacity and be like, hey, I'm going to be able to do this for this period, but I'm also need to look for like I had a period of this year where like, for various reasons, I sort of ended up having 4 hats at the same time. Bad times. But then I was just like, okay, well, all we just have to get through this. And like, and we very thankfully just found two people to hire quite quickly, and then found a third. And hopefully we're close to actually finally finding that 4th role. But I think like, yeah, I mean, I think you sort of know that you can sort of do that thing. But again, it's like, I suppose whenever that happens, I try to be like, it's not happening for forever either. There's like a path out.
Yeah, the light at the end of the tunnel is what we've been describing as. You can see the glimmers, like you can see people now taking stuff off you, and like you don't even know that deals are getting closed. Like that for me was like, we closed this huge deal. I couldn't even tell you who the customer name was. And that was like, okay, now let's go. That's a different level of like, you can feel the gravity shift, you know? So, but yeah, that's just my experience, right?
Thanks for sharing. We actually had one question submitted before the session from Chris, which was, how do you consider the risk of a startup when you have a family? And Kate, I'd love your experience, given that this was a recent decision for you with being founded last year, and obviously you already had 2 kids at that point. So how did you think about the risk of starting something at that point in your life?
Good question. It's a good question. It was something Georgia and I, my co-founder, spoke about a lot when we were making the decision to do this. Like, I really wanted to know that we could raise cash before I walked out the door. Like, I could earn less, but I didn't want to earn nothing. So I think like financial risk was something I thought about a lot. But I think the other thing for me was actually like almost like psychological risk. Like, I think our business, I mean, a lot of people might not know what Human is, but we started it, a lot of why we started it was me and Georgia's experiences dealing with family members who had been sick. And in my case, it was my parents, but also my kids. And so for me, I was really struggling at the time with going to work, feeling like I was away from them when they weren't well, and that I wasn't helping during those 8 hours. Even though I was earning money and that would contribute to my family, like that felt like a risk, like that felt shit. And so like actually working on Human felt psychologically less risky for me because it was related to what my kids were going through. And so like, I think risk is, when you weigh up risk, you have to ask yourself like, what risk? Like financial risk, emotional risk, like what does that look like? I think there's like, and obviously like, I was in a very lucky position financially that my husband was also working at that time, and like we were able to make that call. And I think financial risk when you have a family is obviously a paramount one. But I think there are other risks to consider as well. And I really felt like if I didn't do this, that I would felt like I would be betraying myself. Like I felt like I had gone through this really horrible thing and I had skills to try and fix a problem that had deeply impacted my children and me. And I felt like I had a choice to choose between just focusing on myself or like using my skills to help other people. And so that was also a risk. And so I think really important to like unpack what risk means to you. Like, what does that look like? And yeah, what are all the pros and cons that can happen? And one thing my psychologist has always told me, which I think is good, is like, think of the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. Like if it goes, each thing, if like, what's the worst thing that can happen in each situation? And which of those worst things would you be more happy living with? Like people often do like pros and cons, but I think actually just take both cons and compare both cons in the 2 situations. And then like decide which of those cons is actually something you're not worth living with. And like my worst con was like, okay, I'm going to do this and financially like it doesn't work. And then financially I realized it was a bad fucking decision and I'll go get another job. Like versus like, I don't do this and then I feel like I've betrayed myself emotionally. Like that was kind of, for me, that was my experience. So I think just unpacking the risk and understanding what are the risks to you, and then look at like the 2 risks you're weighing up and which is the worst one. Make a decision that way.
I love that framework. And there's obviously risks in not taking chances as well, and what it might mean for you knowing that you had the opportunity. I mean, Siobhan, you talked about this during mat leave too. You get that sort of feeling like you have to do this. And so there's a risk to you feeling like you didn't achieve your potential because you held back on something. So there's a lot to consider there, but thanks for sharing your approach to that, Kate. We also had another question submitted by Elicia beforehand. I promise it wasn't me submitting a question. Spelled slightly differently, but it was when you had kids a choice you made intentionally? If so, how did you think through this choice? I'd love to hear from you, Simon, and then maybe you, Mark, because you both had kids after you started your businesses, in terms of how you thought about this.
Yeah, so I mean, was it intentional? I mean, sort of. So I think we'd seen a lot of our close friends, or some of our close friends, try to have kids, and it takes several years for it to come into fruition. And so, when we made the decision, we both had the assumption that it was going to take us several years for it to actually happen. And then we were on the other end of the spectrum, and, first time, a few months later, we're like, all right, great. This is happening, and it's happening much sooner than we expected. And that was actually really challenging for me, because I'd mentally said, I've got 2 years to get our business into a shape where I feel like it can support our family financially, and I've got the team that I'm working with who can make sure that I can get the distance I need from the business to be able to be successful in what I'm doing at home as well as at work. And so that it actually really rattled me. And you know, the first 12 months of our kind of parenting journey was not very smooth because we got the timing wrong in the wrong way. You know, I think often it takes people longer than expected, whereas for us it was just much faster than what we'd expected. You can't. Everyone says you can't plan these things. I think some people can and some people can't, and the only way you find out is by giving it a shot, and that's difficult.
And it's so impossible to know just what you're getting yourself into before. And so I can imagine, like, everyone talks about that first year of parenting in particular just being so hard to adjust to your new reality. So if mentally you're expecting it to be a few years later, I can understand how that would be confronting, particularly when you're managing a growing business as well, and a broader team and all the complexities that come with that.
Yeah, and I think you've only really got 6 months to realize that actually that time frame is different to what you thought it would be. So, you know, there is no perfect time. No one is ever ready. But for us, personally, I really needed that extra 12 months, and not having it made life, you know, made work really challenging, and that made life really challenging as well. So yeah, you want to be in a good place when that happens. And we didn't quite get the timing of that right, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience, Simon. Mark, I'd love to hear your experience. You've obviously had your two since founding Qwilr.
Yeah, I mean, I think so we basically decided we wanted to have kids, and I actually can't remember if I explicitly talked about it with my co-founder, but anyway, I think he was sort of generally aware. But
that's an interesting point. I'm sure that happens a lot, right? Like with co-founders, where you have to be open about the timing of what you're thinking, and particularly if there's two of you that are both in that same
in a similar zone. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
so Dylan and I weren't at the time, but I think I mean, sorry, I think like, so yeah, we definitely, like, there was some degree of like sort of conversation around that, but I suppose the thing on our side was, like, I've kind of got a similar story to Simon, maybe slightly different in a way. I mean, I actually sort of felt like there's someone, there's a founder that I'm friends with who has a line which is like, nothing better for a startup than to start running out of money, because all of a sudden your priorities become really incredibly clear. They're like, well, we freaking better make this work, and what the hell's going on over here, and how are we going to all make this line up in this sort of time? And I think to some degree, the deadline that I sort of had upon realizing that we were going to have a child in, as you know, Simon says, you don't have 9 months, you maybe have 6 or 7 to sort of figure it out, was sort of like a very clarifying moment for me to be like, well, I better like get this sorted and whatever else. And I think that was actually pretty good. And I think we actually ended up in a pretty good space there. I will end with an anecdote of like, in the lead up, so we had like a planned cesarean that ended up just before the planned cesarean became an emergency cesarean, which was somewhat stressful, like sort of about 4 or 5 days before the planned one was. And but in the lead up to that, I was like, oh, well, so it's going to be on Wednesday next week. So I'll work a full week this week, and then I'll just take next week off and, be present and da. And I had pushed myself so hard to get everything done so that I could sort of fully switch off on this thing. But on the Friday of the last Friday, I fell asleep in the customer call. Like I was like about to pass out in the car. Like I was literally there, and I was like, oh my God, this can't be happening. I managed to sort of pull it together, but I was like just completely wrecked. And I went home at like sort of 3 p.m. or something like this, or 2 p.m. and just like sort of slept. And then my wife arrived home at 6 p.m. and was like, I think something's wrong. And so I was like in no state to drive. So she drove herself to the hospital and then had an emergency cesarean. So that's how this all, and I remember like passing out at the hospital, like before, because they booked it in for the next morning. And I like had this completely blackout night's sleep, and then woke up at 6 a.m. the next morning, and then had a child by like 6:30. It was completely insane. But I will say that the thing that happened after that, where I took, as Simon said, we didn't take a huge amount of leave, but maybe I think I took 3 weeks off, and like everything worked. It was all fine. Like, founders are important, but they're not, they're not always that essential. And I think in a funny way, coming back to this like company that like everything was great, as Siobhan said, like deals had closed and things had happened, and someone had even been like, I think we were close to hiring, had been hired, and like all this stuff had sort of gone on. And I think it sort of showed that maybe that sort of, I think sometimes you can, not say you have like a hero thing, but I think sometimes you can sort of be like, oh, I must be there on all things. And like, that's bullshit. I don't think that's sort of true. I think, but I will say that like that 6 month, like having that time to sort of get focused, I think like you want to make sure you sort of, you're trying to do as much as you can to not waste that time.
Thanks for sharing, Mike. When you initially said you were falling asleep, I thought you meant like during the birth you ended up falling asleep. So it's slightly better that it may have been during a customer call.
No, I was alert. I was very much like, that is a moment that you, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm mindful of times. I think we probably have one last question, and it would be one I'd love to hear everyone's perspective on. So it might be a bit of a quick fire one. But one of the ones we had was, what's the most tactical tip you have for founders aspiring or existing who also want to be engaged parents? I know it's a big question, so we're gonna have to bring it down to something really tactical, practical that people could walk away with that you found helpful in your journey. So Kate, you look like you're putting your hand up to go.
Yeah, I've got something to say. So I think number one, figure out what you need in your life to be happy. And some of that might be starting something, and there might be other things. Don't measure that against anybody else. Like what you need is what you need. Don't be like, I think this boundary is like fair. Doesn't fucking matter. What do you need? What do you need to be happy? And if starting a business is one of those things, and like fleshing out an idea is one of those things, then like cool. And then like find people who support you being that person. So like if you're gonna, I think having a co-founder is the best decision you can make if you can find a person that is like great co-founder, best decision, not a good fit, worst decision. So like find a person that really cares about you being that person, then find out what person they want to be, what they need, and try give them that. And then hire a team and do the same thing. And like if you can build a team of people that really understand what they need to be happy and like can communicate that, and like you can create an environment where people can do that, I think you'll build a really successful business. But like I think you got to figure out like for yourself what your needs are. And I think a lot of people don't spend enough time thinking about that, and they think about what's fair or what's reasonable. And like I think people should do that regardless of whether or not they're parents. And if you do that before you have kids, like you'll probably have a lot less pain along the way. And if you wait to have kids, then your kids are going to teach you that lesson anyway. So like I think that's like just spend time figuring out what you need to be the best version of yourself, and then find people who support that. I think that's like a really important lesson.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Mark, I might put you on the hot spot. Practical tip.
I think just the quick one is, I mean, I think the nice thing, I suppose the thing just not to forget in all this stuff is that you have these delightful, I mean, there's sometimes wretched, but sometimes delightful, wonderful beings filled with joy. And I think like, I remember before I had kids, I would do things like play squash or go rock climbing, or like kind of do activities that were like very involved, and I kind of couldn't think about work while doing them. I would like actively seek out things that you had to have your brain switched on sort of, and like being present with a toddler or a baby or whatever else, I think like it can really, it's really like positive. And I think it also can just reframe things of like this disaster, because they're like, every week there's some wonderful thing that happens and some other bloody disaster that occurs. And you go home and hang out with a toddler who tells you that you're a pirate now. And it's like, nothing else. Like it's all kind of fades into sort of perspective.
Love that. Siobhan?
I think for me, probably the thing that's got me through this whole environment, because like it's a pretty lonely thing to be like building a business at the start where your head's down, you're not really like spending a lot of time with other people, right? Like, and when you're right in the thick of it, and then you've got kids, you kind of are only doing those two things. Well, that was me, right? I had these two things and that was it. And you wouldn't see a lot of me other than that. And you know this more than anyone, Alicia, like that's me, right? The thing that I think is really helpful is like, if you're doing the kid thing, like I explain to my kids, I like they're part of this, like I'm part of their life, they're part of my life. And that they have a little bit of understanding into like, so we do this thing on Fridays, we'll do our wins. And it sounds like a stand-up, but it's not. It's like we're just
Around the
like,
dinner table.
yeah, we just sit and like they're little, they're tiny, and for them their wins are just different, and like what was the good things and what was the bad part of it, like, and it's just like, for me, a bad part is I had a friend at work who doesn't work with me anymore, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's just having this like open thing where at least they can understand when I do disappear, and like I got to travel. So there's two of us, one can only travel. So I'm the person that has to travel because I'm the customer facing person rather than like the CTO, right? So then I'm the mom away. So it's kind of like helping them understand, like, why am I going to Vegas? Like, why am I needed here? Oh, I'm doing this big event and I'm doing this thing, right? So I don't know. I just think trying to not treat them like babies in a way that they do understand. They see stuff, they pick stuff up. Like my little 2-year-old would walk around with a piece of toast talking on the phone because she was clearly copying me. Do you know what I mean? Like, they get what's going on. So I think my thing is just like involve them as much as you can without like loading them up every night on Friday with all your woes.
Love that. Thanks, Siobhan. And Simon, practical tip.
Mine's super tactical, but I think often as a founder, CEO, you have a lot of work-related travel, and something we did really early on was say, instead of doing lots of small trips, let's try and do only 1 or 2 longer trips through the year and travel as a family. And so we're in America in the middle of the year. Every year our kids go to summer camps there, and it's become an amazing part of, the year that we all look forward to. And the kids have got friends in another country, and we get to see them every year when we travel over there. So it's a really good way of making travel work as a family rather than being someone, you being away from the family on a regular basis. So if you can make that part of how you work as a business, it's a really neat thing, I think, for everyone involved.
Such a great tip. Thanks for sharing, Simon. And in the interest of time, I know run over. I could continue this conversation all day, but I need to be respectful of all your times and everyone on the call. So I think we'll wrap there. But thank you again so much to our panelists, Simon, Siobhan, Kate, and Mark, for sharing your experience and elevating these conversations as we spoke about at the start. We really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining and for engaging in the conversation. I saw there was lots of comments in the chat, and there's meetups that are being planned, which is just awesome to hear. You'll see more from Airtree on this topic over the coming weeks and months. It's something we're very passionate about. So appreciate you engaging in the conversation, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.